I sent a cruel audio to my cheating wife's lover while they were together saying, "I know everything." They got desperate and tried to escape, but I already knew that and did something surprising. I didn't scream, I didn't run, I didn't cry. I just hit the send button. 30 seconds later, their world began to fall apart, and I watched it all with the serenity of someone who had already suffered enough. For weeks, I prepared in silence, while they wallowed in lies. Planning my revenge was the only thing that kept me together. Sleeping next to someone who smiles with their mouth and betrays with their body is an experience that breaks any man inside. I smiled back. Pretending was easy, much more so than I imagined. I observed the schedules, the looks, the long baths, the empty laughs. And every detail made me more certain that she was no longer mine. The worst part wasn't the betrayal, it was the daily contempt disguised as affection. The worst thing was waking up every day next to someone who had someone else in their head, and yet they kissed me as if I were blind. She didn't know I had found out. I had no idea that the applications on her cell phone were cloned onto my old laptop. She thought I was the usual idiot, the predictable husband who only talks about work, who only exists to sort out bills and fix the sink. While she was getting ready more carefully, while she put on the perfume that she said she only used on special occasions, I watched everything like someone watching a silent film, except I already knew the ending. The most humiliating part? Seeing them both laughing at me in the messages. She said things like, "He doesn't even suspect," and, "Today I'm going to pet him just to ease the guilt." The lover, one of those guys who thinks he's the smart one in the story, made fun of me, calling me an asshole husband. I read everything in silence, like someone chewing glass without making a face. The day I decided I wasn't going to pretend anymore, I prepared everything with surgical precision. They were going to meet in a hidden hotel in the center, as usual. But this time, they didn't know that I had already checked in before them. I didn't knock on the door, I didn't enter the room, I didn't make a fuss. I did something much crueler. From the car, while they were both inside, I sent an audio message to his number, with the message that carried weeks of pain and hatred, "I know everything." 5 seconds later, I saw it. 10 seconds later, the missed calls started. She called me. Him too. Messages popped up, all variations of, "Please, can we talk," and, "It's not what you think." That's exactly what I thought. And it was worse. I didn't respond. Not at that moment. I wanted them to taste their own lie. I wanted every second of my silence to be a dry blow to their stomach. They ran out of the hotel, nervous, looking around, like rats leaving a sinking ship. I watched them from across the street, hidden behind the tinted car window, as they looked around for me. They were afraid of what I knew. Scared of what I would do. But what they didn't know was that I had already done it. 3 days ago, I sent a package to the hotel. At reception, I left clear instructions, only deliver at checkout. Inside the box, there was a letter. A letter written calmly, without anger, without swearing. Just facts. Cold, accurate words. And next to the letter, an envelope with documents. Contracts. Transfers. The house deed. The evidence. She lost everything at that moment. The car I was driving was in my name, the accounts were frozen. The lover, poor thing, had no idea that the cell phone he used to communicate with her was a chip bought by me, tracked by me, monitored by me. When he threw his cell phone on the floor, thinking he was getting rid of the test, I already had all the prints saved in the cloud. But it wasn't just that. The real blow was yet to come. I knew they were going to run away. He knew that she, desperate, would want to leave with him. So I planned everything so that their escape would be the beginning of the end. As they drove to the coast, hoping to escape the shame, an envelope awaited them at the hotel where they would hide. Another delivery from me. One more letter. Only this time, it wasn't about her. It was about him. I found out everything about the lover. The company where he worked. The woman he still hadn't had the courage to leave. The 2 young children. Financing in the wife's name. I sent a copy of the letter to his wife too. I let the masks fall all at once. When she tried to call him, she got no answer. And at that moment, she realized, she was abandoned by me and by him. The game had changed. Days later, she appeared at the door of the house that was once ours. Crying. Alone. He brought flowers, tears and apologies. She said it was all a mistake, that she didn't know what she was doing, that I was the love of her life. He asked for forgiveness. He begged for a second chance. He said all he wanted was to go home. But it wasn't her home anymore. It was mine. And she was just a longing visitor to a home she destroyed with her own hands. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. He just said, "You burned everything. There weren't even ashes left." And I closed the door. Not because I was angry, but because, for the first time in years, I was at peace. A month later, I met someone. I wasn't looking for it, but it showed up. Simple, intelligent, true. A light conversation, without secrets. An honest smile. And there, between coffees and sincere laughter, I knew, it was the beginning of something new. A clean chapter. Free from the dirt that drowned me. What no one knows, and perhaps never imagines, is what I wrote in that last letter she received. The letter she read in the hotel, already abandoned, alone. What was written there made her call my mother crying, send an email to my sister begging for help and send hundreds of messages that are still on my cell phone, unread. Because what I wrote there was enough for her to understand that forgiveness is sometimes impossible. And that losing someone who loved you unconditionally is the real punishment. But perhaps the most curious thing about this whole story is that, even after all this, she still believes that one day I will forgive her. What was written in that final letter? Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support and never romanticize any type of betrayal. All stories are fictional, created with the sole purpose of showing, in an intense and realistic way, how betrayal can destroy lives, trust and futures. Get ready. What you will hear now is a shocking story, full of twists, emotion and profound lessons. Let it begin, the truth behind the lie. Richard has always been a methodical, calm man with restrained gestures. Someone who grew up learning that stability was more valuable than adventure, that loyalty came before desire, and that silence often said more than fiery speeches. From a young age, he found a certain pleasure in caring for others. He was the type of man who knew how to make a strong, silent coffee on a Sunday morning, who cleared the snow from the driveway before his wife woke up, and who preferred to listen carefully rather than impose his opinion. Life had taught him to be discreet but firm. He worked as a financial manager in an international logistics company, where he was respected for his sense of responsibility and unusual patience in the face of daily pressures. He wasn't the most sociable among his colleagues, but everyone trusted him. He had a presence that did not demand attention, but commanded respect. A man who liked predictability and found comfort in well-structured routines. He wasn't the type of person to command attention in a crowd, but when someone needed balance, he was the anchor. Amanda, on the other hand, was vibrant in nature. She had a restless energy, a constant need for new stimuli, to feel alive in every gesture, every little pleasure in life. She was a woman of discreet and captivating beauty, but what caught most attention about her was the way she moved through the world, as if every place could be a stage, even when no one was watching her. Amanda worked in image and behavior consultancy, providing services to small brands and also to people looking for self-confidence. He had a trained eye for detail and a refined sensitivity for what was aesthetically harmonious. His speech was sweet but firm. Intelligent, expressive and a little impulsive. Their marriage, at first glance, seemed unlikely, almost like a collision between two different ways of existing. But perhaps it was precisely this difference that, in the beginning, brought them together so powerfully. Richard provided security. Amanda brought color. He was ground, she was wind. And when they met, by chance, in a bookstore during a rainy afternoon, it seemed as if fate had been rehearsing that moment for years. They married 2 years later, after a peaceful courtship, full of short trips, impromptu dinners and silent afternoons at home reading or simply being together. Their life together began in a serene, almost poetic way. They bought a house with a garden on the outskirts of the city and took care of every corner as if they were going to build a capsule there that the world couldn't touch. Richard remodeled the office so Amanda could work from home. Amanda planted lavender around the porch because she said the smell brought peace. In the eyes of those who observed them, they were the portrait of balance, a mature couple, who respected each other, who knew how to dialogue, who avoided conflicts with an almost admirable skill. There were no screams, no bitter silences. There were long dialogues, exchanges of glances, complicity in small details. Richard was not a man of grand romantic gestures, but his constancy was his greatest gift. Amanda, even though she was more emotional, seemed to find comfort in her husband's predictability. She smiled at him tenderly, he watched her with devotion. In the first few years, everything seemed to flow as it should. Their finances were in order, their work was prospering, and dinners at home were often filled with wine, restrained laughter and conversations about long-term plans. Close friends envied the relationship. They said it was rare to see two adults so different live in harmony, without clashes, without noise. But behind Richard's calm gaze, there were layers that few knew about. He was too observant not to notice the silences that began to appear between the speeches. The touches that became shorter. The absences that Amanda didn't explain as enthusiastically as before. But he didn't confront. He welcomed. I expected. He always believed that love also meant respecting the other person's time, not invading their space, not pressing for answers before the right time. Amanda, in turn, began to feel suffocated by a routine that, little by little, stopped enchanting her. What was once security began to feel like immobility. What was once peace became silence. She felt guilty for thinking like that, for looking at her own husband and asking herself if that was exactly what she wanted for the next 20 or 30 years. I wasn't unhappy, but I wasn't completely happy either. And this middle ground began to corrode his soul in a subtle way. At first, they were just thoughts. Then came the comparisons, the unfulfilled dreams, the opportunities you let pass by. Amanda didn't blame Richard. I knew he was a good man, the best I could have had. But inside her a need grew for something she herself couldn't name. It was like an emptiness disguised as restlessness. As if she wanted to escape a place where she was still loved, but she could no longer love with the same intensity. She dove deeper into the work. He started going out more, accepting invitations to events, expanding his network of professional contacts. And each new face he encountered was an attempt to find himself again. At home, he maintained his kindness, his smile at breakfast, his automatic hugs at night. But inside, it was no longer the same. Richard understood everything. But he didn't say it. He kept it to himself, as he always did. Some nights, after Amanda went to sleep, he would go down to the office, turn on the lamp and sit in silence, looking at the photo of them in the frame on the bookshelf. Sometimes he wrote in a black-covered notebook, other times he just got lost in thought. There was no anger in his eyes, but a contained, resigned sadness. Like someone watching a work of art slowly fade, without being able to do anything. Even so, he remained the ideal husband. He remembered important dates, sent messages in the middle of the day, bought his favorite flowers for no reason. I tried to rekindle the flame with small gestures, but Amanda didn't seem to see it. Or I saw it, and I just didn't feel the same anymore. Sundays became silent. Long conversations turned into short sentences. The complicit glances now met each other frequently. Still, no one talked about it. It was as if they were both trapped in an invisible pact to keep up appearances until the last breath of the relationship. Richard began to avoid deeper questions. Amanda smiled out of obligation. And the house, once filled with the scent of lavender and fresh coffee, began to smell like absence. They still went out together, had dinner out every now and then, and took smiling photos to post on social media. But the smiles had different tones. Richard's were those of someone trying to maintain hope. Amanda's were from someone who was already in another place, even with the body present. And perhaps, the most painful thing of all, was that they both knew it, but neither had the courage to say it out loud. Because admitting that something is over hurts more than pretending that everything is still okay. Especially when what's at stake is a story built with so much care, with so much love, even if that love is now silent. In the midst of this apparent calm, the days continued to pass. Richard would wake up early, drink his coffee in silence, go to work and return at the end of the day with more emotional than physical tiredness. Amanda spent hours away, citing professional commitments, events, meetings. At night, they lay side by side like two strangers who share the same roof, but no longer share the same world. The feeling was that of living in a play that had already passed the third act, but no one had the courage to lower the curtains. Deep down, they both knew something was about to change. And when that change came, nothing would be the same again. But until then, there was still a lot going on. And every gesture, every absence, every silence carried a weight that would soon come to the surface. Because no matter how much the truth is hidden, it always finds a way to reveal itself. And when that happens, the crash can be more devastating than any storm. Amanda started to arrive home later. In the beginning, it was just 20 minutes beyond the usual time, explained by last-minute meetings, demanding clients, or unexpected traffic jams. Richard accepted each justification with the same calm expression as always, a slight nod and a restrained smile, as if he understood that life outside also required sacrifices. But he noticed. Every change in tone of voice, every smell of perfume that didn't match what she wore in the morning, every vacant look during dinner. Amanda had become an expert at managing apologies with almost artistic precision. His gaze remained sweet, his voice remained soft, but the absence already inhabited his gestures, and this was impossible to ignore. Richard never asked directly. His silence was not passivity. It was strategy. He knew that the truth often reveals itself when haste does not interfere. And he waited, not out of weakness, but out of coldness. I waited for the right moment, the exact moment when everything became clear enough that no words were necessary. She, in turn, seemed to have rediscovered an energy that she hadn't shown in a long time. He took more care of his appearance, had a new sparkle in his eyes and a rehearsed enthusiasm when telling vague stories about new contracts. The cell phone, which used to be left on the kitchen table, now accompanied her like an extension of her body. It was always in silent mode, facing down, with the screen locked by a password that Richard never gave himself the right to ask for. The routine continued, but it was deformed. Dinners were no longer tasteful, breakfasts were too silent and the nights were long for both of us, each lying next to someone we no longer recognized. The air between them was thick, filled with everything that was unsaid. Richard began writing down details, as if he were putting together a puzzle. The times, the names mentioned with suspicious frequency, the memory lapses that Amanda had when trying to repeat the stories she had already told. His expression was neutral, but his insides were churning with a corrosive intensity. One afternoon, while Amanda was taking a shower and leaving her cell phone unlocked on the office table, a discreet notification lit up the screen. Richard wasn't one to invade spaces, but something in that message, in that name that appeared so frequently in recent weeks, drove him. He didn't have to search much. It only took a few minutes for the pieces to start falling into place. The messages exchanged were cold, calculated, full of codes that only seemed mysterious to those who didn't know what to look for. Amanda was careful, but not careful enough. Photos exchanged, inside jokes, schedule arrangements. There it was, before his eyes, what he feared and at the same time expected. The confirmation did not bring relief. It brought a dull pain, a pressure in his chest that prevented him from breathing for a few seconds. He stood up slowly, as if carrying an unbearable weight on his shoulders, and returned to the room as if nothing had happened. When she got out of the shower, she found her husband on the couch, watching some documentary, like on so many other nights. Over the next few days, he continued to observe. He confirmed the pattern, marked the times, mapped out the places. He knew that it wasn't enough to just know, he needed to understand how much he had been deceived, how deeply Amanda had delved into that other universe without him realizing. The conversations between her and the other were filled with intimacy, with a complicity that, one day, had been theirs alone. Amanda said she felt alive next to that man. She said that with him everything was lighter, that she could laugh without guilt, that she was truly seen. Richard read it all without shedding a tear, but he felt each word like an internal cut, silent and continuous. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't talk to friends or family. He kept it to himself, as always. But it started to change. He became even quieter, more restrained. Not out of regret, but out of calculation. He needed to know how far Amanda would go. I needed to be sure that what they were experiencing was really the end. She, oblivious to her husband's silent turmoil, delved deeper and deeper into that new passion. He started creating excuses to spend weekends away, citing events in other cities, emergency meetings. Richard smiled, helped with the bags, wished good luck. And each time she left, he collected more evidence, more fragments of the betrayal. It turned out that the lover was someone Amanda met on one of the consulting projects. An apparently successful, divorced, charming man, with that typical talk of someone who knows how to manipulate emotional weaknesses. It was obvious that he was nothing more than a common opportunist, but to Amanda, he represented what Richard no longer was, novelty. The lover had no idea he was being watched. His meetings with Amanda were marked with naivety, as if they were at the beginning of a teenage romance. Photos in motels, messages with ridiculous nicknames, empty promises. Amanda came home after dates with a strange smile, a false lightness, and made a noticeable effort to act normally. But it was already too late. Richard no longer saw her as he used to. The bond between them had broken, even though they still shared the same roof, the same cutlery, the same bed. And it was on a Thursday night that Richard decided he would no longer watch. She arrived late, said the traffic was terrible, made up a story about a demanding customer. Richard just nodded. He said he was going to take a shower and then sleep. Amanda seemed relieved at the lack of questions. But that night, while she was sleeping soundly, her cell phone disappeared from her bedside table. In the morning, Richard put it back in the same place, but now with all the content mirrored on his personal computer. From then on, every word, every photo, every call, everything would be his too. Amanda had no idea what was approaching. She thought she was in control. That his lie was smart enough to survive the grind. Richard then began to act. He began to record each bank transaction, spoke to a lawyer in confidence, transferred the assets to a holding company in the name of third parties, and left clear instructions so that no transactions were made without his authorization. Amanda didn't have access to anything. When he traveled for work, he would return earlier than expected and observe her from a distance, parked on streets near the places where she said she was. And, unsurprisingly, she was never where she said she was. Richard didn't get angry. Just confirmed. Created a plan. Each part of the revenge would be orchestrated with the precision of a silent maestro. He didn't want destruction. I wanted the silence of abandonment. He wanted the weight of contempt as punishment. It wasn't enough that she knew she was wrong. It was necessary for you to feel, with all your senses, what it means to lose someone who still loves you. It was on a Friday that Richard decided the game was over. He knew where Amanda would be. I knew with whom. He knew the hotel room, the check-in time, the length of stay. From the car, parked a few meters from the entrance, he prepared the audio. The voice is firm, cold, direct. 3 words that echoed like a sentence, I know everything. And pressed the button. Amanda viewed it seconds later. The lover too. The calls came, the messages multiplied. But Richard didn't respond. Just watched. He saw the two of them leave the hotel in a hurry, nervous looks, hurried steps. Amanda was shaking, the man was trying to calm her down. They looked lost, as if the ground had disappeared. But what they still didn't know was that what Richard had prepared for them went far beyond a simple audio. Because everything up until then was just the beginning. The next morning, Amanda returned home. Eyes swollen, hands shaking. He found Richard drinking coffee on the porch, as usual. He looked at her with the same serene expression, but without any heat. She tried to speak, but he just got up, left the cup in the sink and went upstairs. Amanda stood in the kitchen, not understanding if he had given up on everything or if something worse was still coming. In the days that followed, his behavior remained unchanged. Quiet, meticulous, almost gentle. But she knew. She felt it. Something had changed irreversibly. Richard didn't touch her anymore. He didn't look at her with the same shine. And now she was in a panic. Because she finally understood that she could really lose him. I just had no idea what he was about to do. And when she found out, everything Amanda thought safe would disappear in a cruel and definitive way. The morning after the revelation, Amanda woke up feeling like she was living in a nightmare that dragged on in silence, with no defined end. Richard was no longer by her side. The cold bed and dim room made it clear that he had woken up hours ago, and that in itself was a sign. There was no longer hot coffee waiting on the table, nor a note on the counter saying good morning. All Amanda found when she came down was the echo of her own footsteps. The house was in order, clean, intact, but completely empty of presence. Richard was there, somewhere, she knew it, but what was once home was now a strange environment, full of glaring absences. When she found him in the garden, he was pruning the plants with an almost inhuman calm, as if nothing had happened. Amanda tried to start the conversation, the most difficult of all, but the words stuck in her throat. She knew there was no longer any room for justifications. Richard just said, without looking up from the pages, that she would get what she deserved. And it wouldn't be with screams. It would be silent. Amanda trembled. Not out of fear, but because she understood, in that moment, that Richard was no longer the man she knew. Something inside him had been destroyed, and in its place something was born that she didn't understand. That same afternoon, he received a call from the reception of a hotel where he had been with his lover a few days ago. They informed that a package in their name had been delivered there and that, as a precaution, they kept it safe awaiting its return. Amanda, confused, hung up the phone and remained standing for long minutes. A chill ran down his spine. It wasn't just the discomfort of being exposed. It was the certainty that something bigger was happening behind what she could see. When trying to unlock her own cell phone, she noticed that she had been disconnected from several accounts. Banks, emails, even your professional access. He tried to reset passwords, but everything indicated that they had been changed. Suddenly, he realized that he no longer had control over absolutely anything. He ran towards his home office, turned on the computer, but all his work folders were empty. Photos, contracts, contacts, everything deleted. A growing panic took over his thoughts. He called his accountant, and he, embarrassed, informed him that all financial transactions had been suspended due to lack of authorization from the holder of the joint accounts, Richard. Amanda felt the world spin. The connection between his hands and the keyboard disappeared, he lacked air. In the early evening, when he walked through the front door with the serenity of someone returning from the market, she couldn't resist. He came at him with a barrage of questions. I wanted to know what was happening, why she was being excluded from everything, what he was doing with his life. Richard remained silent. He took off his shoes, walked to the kitchen, grabbed a glass of wine and only then, in the quietest voice he had ever used with her, said that he had left a letter in the study. Amanda ran to the place, crossed the corridors with her heart racing, opened the studio door shaking. On the wooden table, there was a white envelope with his name written in hand. No stamp, no sender. Just the name. His hands were sweaty as he broke through the paper and pulled out the sheet inside. The handwriting was familiar, but the content was brutal. In the letter, Richard accurately described everything she had done in the last few months. The meetings, the conversations, the laughter exchanged with another man. But it wasn't just that. He had written about how he felt. About how her every gesture, every lie, tore him apart inside, one piece at a time. There were no direct accusations, just findings. Amanda read and the tears fell uncontrollably. He talked about the plans they had together, the dreams he kept secret for both of them, about how he thought about children, about growing old with her. And how, now, all that was nothing more than ruin. At the end of the letter, there was the revelation. Richard said that he already knew everything even before the first message exchanged between her and her lover. That I had noticed the looks, the gestures, the distance. And from that moment on, he began to engineer his own liberation. But not just emotional. He revealed that he had bought, months ago, the same hotel where the two met for the first time. That he had posed as an interested investor, created a shell company, hired the team, and assumed control of the administration. The hotel had been acquired by him with a single objective, to transform the scene of betrayal into the symbol of reconstruction itself. Everything she experienced with her lover in that place was supervised by Richard. He had images. Audios. Reports. Dates. People who knew. Nothing was by chance. And more. In the same box that waited for Amanda at the hotel reception, there was a flash drive. It contained records of her meetings with the other man, recordings legally obtained inside the room, surveillance images authorized by management, of himself. Amanda fell to her knees. The letter also said that a copy had been sent to her lover as well, and another to his wife, who until then was unaware of the whole story. But the final blow would come in the last lines. This morning, the documents were filed. The house is no longer in our names. It's just in mine. The cars, the bills, the investments, everything is under my care. You'll have 30 days to find a new place to live. And, if you want to talk, if you want to say something, I'll be home. But don't wait for me. I'm not there anymore. Not emotionally. Amanda screamed. A dull, suffocated scream of despair and shame. She knew she had lost. Not just a man, but a story, an entire life. When he returned to the house, he was no longer there. It disappeared for days. No message, no explanation beyond what had already been said. Amanda tried to contact her lover's wife, but was ignored. Tried to call him, but the number was out of service. All she had now was deafening silence. In the bedroom, sitting on the bed where they previously shared dreams and plans, Amanda cried in silence. For everything that was and for what would never be again. The phone rang. It was an unknown number. He answered with a trembling voice, and on the other end, a female voice. It was the new owner of the property where Amanda was providing consultancy. She informed that, from the following month, she would have to vacate the commercial space. The contract had been terminated. And the new owner? A silent investor. Amanda didn't need to ask. She already knew. Everywhere she looked, everything that was hers was gone. And in its place, all that was left was the memory of what he once had. Then destroyed. And what I could never rebuild. Because I had crossed an invisible and irreversible line. And now, all she could do was watch, helplessly, exactly how Richard had plotted his revenge. Not with screams. Not with scandals. But with silence, intelligence, and surgical precision. Amanda spent days adrift, as if suspended in a dense fog where time and space had completely lost their meaning. There were no more routines, there was no client schedule, meetings, or appointments. She walked around the house in silence, touching the furniture, the pictures, the cushions as if hoping that some common object would bring back the meaning she had lost. The house that was once her refuge now seemed like a strange setting. Richard's absence was a living void, an absence that filled everything. There were no clothes in his closet, nor his usual mug on the sink drainer. The drawers were empty, the books were missing from the shelves, and the office desk, previously organized to the point of exaggeration, now contained only the dust of departure. He had gone without saying where, without leaving a trace, just meticulously orchestrated destruction. She tried to react. He drafted messages, composed long emails that he never sent. I wrote letters to him every night, which at dawn I tore into small pieces and threw out the window. She was afraid of leaving the house, afraid of meeting someone she knew who might look at her with that mix of pity and judgment. His social life had been erased as quickly as his bank accounts. The cards were refused in supermarkets, the bank app no longer opened, and when he looked for the manager, he was told curtly that he no longer held any accounts. His name had been removed from everything. The woman who loved to show off as independent now depended on rides, favors, and excuses to keep breathing. One afternoon, desperate, she decided to go to Richard's office. She thought that perhaps, seeing her, he would be moved. I imagined that all it would take was a sincere apology, a gesture of true regret, and he would give in. She knew she had hurt him, but she believed that the love between them was still greater than the pain. He dressed with the care of someone preparing to face the judge of their own story, tied up his hair, hid his swollen eyes with makeup, and walked to the reception desk of the company where he worked. When she asked about him, the receptionist smiled kindly and said that Richard no longer worked there. Amanda hesitated, not understanding. The woman then added, with a neutral tone, "He quit 3 weeks ago. Said he needed a fresh start." She stumbled out of there, feeling like the ground was crumbling beneath her feet. In the taxi back home, he tried calling all of his mutual friends. Nobody answered. Those who returned did so with coolness, just enough courtesy not to appear cruel. Some said they preferred not to get involved. Others, more sincere, stated that they knew about the betrayal and that they completely supported Richard. She was no longer welcome. She had lost not only her husband, but also the circle of people that validated her existence. For the first time, Amanda understood what complete isolation meant. When he arrived home, he found a notification from a notary's office. It was the official notice that the property would be sold within 30 days, as stated in the new social contract of the holding company that was now responsible for the property. Amanda had nowhere to go. His family lived in another state, the brothers with whom he was never very close had not answered his calls for some time. He thought about looking for his lover, perhaps asking for support, but he hesitated. I knew he had disappeared from the map after everything came to light. He was having problems at home, had been reported by his own wife and was possibly facing a contested divorce. Amanda now realized that there were no accomplices in the fall. The betrayal had been a pact of mutual destruction. And she had lost more. It was on a rainy night that Amanda finally saw Richard again. She was sitting under the awning of a downtown cafe, trying to protect herself from the freezing water while seeking emotional refuge in the pages of an old book. And then he appeared, crossing the street under a black umbrella, wearing a dark coat, his expression serene. Their eyes met. For a moment, time seemed suspended. She stood up slowly, walked towards him like someone crossing a minefield, not knowing if the ground would explode or if it would just sink into silence. When he stopped in front of him, he said nothing. I expected him to speak first, as he always did. But Richard just looked at her, without anger, without irony, and said he could sit down. They went to one of the cafe tables, where they looked at each other for long seconds before any words came out. Amanda was the first to break the silence. He said he had made the biggest mistake of his life, that he didn't know what he was looking for when he looked for someone else. He tried to justify his choices with emotional immaturity, with lack, with the fear of stagnation. He spoke sincerely, but with desperation. She said that she missed him, that she still loved him, that she saw herself growing old alongside him, even with everything that had happened. That he had learned in the most painful way possible the value of a story built with love. Richard listened to her without interrupting. He drank his coffee calmly, crossed his arms, and then responded in a voice so calm that the contrast with the content of the words made Amanda shrink in her chair. He said he wasn't angry with her, that he didn't wish her any harm. But something had died inside him at the exact moment he read the first message between her and the other man. That the gestures, the kisses, the looks, everything was contaminated. That their love was, in fact, real, but now it was just a memory. She cried there, in the middle of the coffee shop, asking for a chance, saying that she could change, that she wanted to regain what they had. But Richard was direct. He said he would start his life over again. That he had recently met someone, a woman who came into his story by chance and with whom conversations were light, honest, transparent. That I still didn't know what it would become, but that for the first time in months, I felt peace. Amanda was silent. She realized in that moment that nothing she said would change what was in front of her. That there was no more space. That the love he once received was now being given to someone else. And the cruelest of all, cleanly, honestly, without lies. It was a new, different love. One that didn't need revenge, nor promises. It was real. Richard stood up and said he wanted her to find herself, to rebuild her life with dignity. He wished she would forgive herself one day. And then, with a light touch on the shoulder, he said goodbye and left, leaving Amanda sitting there, with her eyes fixed on the empty cup. She didn't chase it. There were no more races. The love was over. But the lesson would never be forgotten. Because when you destroy someone who only offered you the best of themselves, there is no going back. There are consequences. And Amanda would carry them in silence, throughout her life. Amanda started to walk alone through the streets where she used to walk hand in hand with Richard. The reflections in the windows, the cafes they frequented, the corners where they stopped to look at each other with laughter that seemed eternal, everything now gave her a distorted version of herself, as if the entire city were a broken mirror reflecting the pieces of what was left of her. The memory of the meeting at the coffee shop never left his mind. The way he looked at her without hate, without desire, without any emotion that revealed any trace of bond, that hurt her more than any scream, more than any explicit revenge. He just moved on. And what hurt most wasn't that he left, it was the fact that she knew, with every fiber of her body, that he was right to leave. The woman she had become no longer deserved that love. Realizing this, accepting that she had caused her own end, was what destroyed her day after day. The apartment was emptied little by little. Every object that came off the shelves, every painting removed from the wall, was like a piece of skin ripped off. At first, Amanda tried to resist, begging for deadlines, alleging emotional instability, but the holding company's lawyers were objective and cold. The process was already underway, and she no longer had legal rights to the property. She had to pack her life in cardboard boxes, sort out clothes that no longer made sense, and look at the dusty portraits of a life that she herself decided to discard. There was no one else around to help her. Everyone had disappeared. Including the lover, whose existence now seemed like a delirium, a shadow that, as soon as it came, evaporated without leaving a trace. She didn't know if he was in another state, if he had returned to his wife, or if he just disappeared out of fear of the consequences. But it no longer mattered. He was no longer part of the equation. The truth is he never did. It only served as a catalyst for a rupture that had already been growing inside her long before the first stolen kiss. But recognizing this now was daily torture. The days dragged on. Amanda rented a small studio in the cheapest neighborhood she could afford. The space was cramped, the furniture was improvised, and the silence inside was no longer comforting, it was sepulchral. He tried to regain some clients, but discovered that his image had been tarnished in circles where prestige was fundamental. Several nominations had been withdrawn, projects shelved, emails ignored. She was no longer a reference for elegance or reliability. It had become a symbol of hypocrisy. And the worst thing is that no one needed to spread rumors, all that was needed was the naked, silent truth, without scandal, without headlines. The consequence of one's own choice. Amanda started attending therapy sessions regularly, trying to at least understand how she lost herself in the process. Why did you decide to betray a solid story for an empty adventure? The therapist listened to her in silence and answered hard, deep questions. What did you really want? Why didn't you talk to him? What did you think you would find outside of your marriage? In each session, Amanda faced an invisible mirror that forced her to face the woman she had tried to ignore for so long. Meanwhile, Richard got on with his life. He avoided any contact. Mutual friends respected his silence, but every now and then, someone would let something slip. He was thinner, traveling frequently, involved in projects he hadn't even considered before. He said he was more open, more sociable, with a new smile, a lighter calm. There were even rumors that he was meeting someone, a literature professor he had met at a conference. Amanda wasn't jealous. What I felt was something deeper, more painful, grief. It was as if Richard had died, and in his place another man had been born, with the same face but no shared memory. And she was just a stranger from the past, someone who, by choice, excluded herself from the narrative. One sleepless night, Amanda returned to writing. He wrote letters that he would never send, memories of a life that no longer existed, dialogues that he invented in his head to fill the void of no longer having anyone to confess his anguish to. Sometimes she wrote to herself. As if he needed to report all the mistakes so that he would never forget the price of each choice. Over time, she began to think about the idea of forgiving herself. Not for the purpose of seeking redemption in Richard's eyes, but because he needed to survive. The pain of guilt was already unbearable. And although there was no justification for what he did, there was still a chance he wouldn't do it again. Repentance, when true, is a burden and also a door. But Amanda was still weighed down. And there, at the bottom of this emotional labyrinth, a dilemma began to emerge. I knew I wouldn't be forgiven. I knew that Richard had already freed himself from all that. But what if, for some reason, he one day wanted to hear her again? What if, even though he knew they would never return, he wanted to understand his pain? Would it be worth accepting this meeting? Or was it selfishness, an attempt to seek comfort in those she destroyed? She spent days reflecting on this, rereading the letter he had left, trying to find some trace of openness between the lines. But everything there was definitive. And yet, there was something that didn't allow her to simply retreat into silence. It was then that he wrote the last letter. Not to ask for forgiveness, nor to beg for a new chance. But to tell what I had learned. He recounted every little emotional death he faced, every sleepless night, every moment when he almost gave in to despair. He didn't romanticize his pain. He accepted his mistakes with the necessary brutality. He said he didn't expect anything, but he needed to say it. And he sealed the envelope with the date it was all over. He left the letter at the entrance of the old building where he lived, with no name on the sender, just a "thank you" written in shaky handwriting. And he returned home with a light heart, not out of hope, but finally. Life went on. Slowly, Amanda found some balance again. He started teaching image consultancy classes to young people from the outskirts and found sharing a way to rebuild himself. She was no longer in demand in the social circles she previously frequented, but she discovered a new audience. People who, like her, were looking to start over. Love, she knew, might not return. But she found another type of affection, respect for herself, which she ignored so much. On the other side of the story, Richard was reading the letter. Sitting on the balcony of an inn where he spent a few days with his new partner, he read in silence. He finished reading with his eyes fixed on the final line. He felt neither anger nor compassion. He felt humanity. And he understood, more clearly than ever, that loving does not make us immune to mistakes. But forgiving, even if only within oneself, frees us. There was still something to happen. Something that would definitively change the course of that story. And that would make it clear that no end comes without consequences. Not even the end of a love. Some stories don't end with reconciliations, symbolic dinners, or apologies at airports. Some stories end with silence, with eyes that no longer meet and with doors that never open again. The resolution for Amanda came on an ordinary morning, the kind where you wake up without foreseeing that the day will bring a definitive end. She woke up with the same simple routine as always, made her coffee black and strong, sat on the window seat and watched the movement of the street, the coming and going of people, life continuing outside with cruel indifference. That morning seemed like every other morning, but the white envelope left under the door, unmarked, with his handwriting written cleanly and firmly, sealed the final outcome. When he opened it, he found not a letter, but the signed copy of the sale of the old house, proof that everything now belonged to someone else, and along with it, a simple note: I carry no regrets. I only leave behind what once dragged me. Be free. Amanda didn't cry. It was beyond that. The pain she felt now was mature, sedimented, made up of layers of consciousness. It was no longer the suffering of those who were left, but the weight of those who recognized what they destroyed. The letter contained no insults, no promises, no hopes. Just a clean close. A final point written with dignity. She finally understood that there would never be a new beginning between them. Not even as friends. And as much as it hurt, it was also fair. It was the sentence of someone who left voluntarily and now had to live with the consequences. She would continue her life, but now with a clarity she had never had. He rose not with heroism, but with humility. He started teaching courses in poor communities more frequently, teaching not only fashion and image, but also about choices and consequences, without ever talking about his own history. Helping others became his way of finding some meaning in what he had lost. Not for redemption, but for an attempt at balance. And little by little, he rebuilt a new version of himself, more sober, more discreet, and more human. Amanda didn't fall in love again. Not out of fear, but because he understood that before giving himself up again, he would need to relearn how to belong. Meanwhile, Richard's life progressed with the firmness of someone who has learned not to carry weight that does not belong to him. He chose to start over not with anger, but with purpose. The woman he met, that literature professor, became his travel and thought partner. Someone with whom conversations weren't forced, with whom silences weren't heavy. He did not look for a substitute in it, he did not compare, he did not project the past into the present. I wanted something new, light and, above all, true. He didn't tell his story right away. He waited for the right moment to talk about Amanda, the fall, the pain, the reconstruction. And when he did, it was with the serenity of someone who doesn't have thorns. She listened, understood and respected the space that it still occupied within him. Richard moved to another city for good, invested in a small sustainable tourism business, started giving lectures on emotional intelligence in corporate environments, helping other people see the importance of emotional limits and taking care of their own emotional health. Your pain became a tool. Not to inspire revenge, but to teach that losing is not the end. Sometimes it is just the beginning of a freedom that can only be achieved after looking squarely at everything that has been denied for too long. The old house was renovated and sold to a recently married couple, who painted the walls in cheerful colors and replanted lavender in the garden. The past there was buried under new concrete and fresh paint, with no traces of suffering, just stories that no longer belonged in that space. The neighborhood no longer talked about Amanda or Richard. Time had played its role, and each person went on with their lives away from memories. The lover, in turn, disappeared from the social spotlight. After the scandal surrounding his marriage, he was fired from the company where he worked and, with his reputation tarnished, he discreetly moved to a small town in the countryside. Your contacts have been deleted, your virtual profiles deactivated. He chose anonymity not out of true regret, but out of shame. He never tried to look for Amanda again. They were accomplices in a mistake, but never companions in repentance. They were loose pieces of the same mistake. The dilemma that remained for those who knew this story is the most painful of all. What do you do with love when it is destroyed from within? Is it possible to rebuild something where respect has been corrupted? Amanda chose to try to live with the answers she never had, and Richard decided to live with the certainties he discovered within himself. Neither of them had a traditional happy ending. But both met an end. A clean end, no dramatic scenes, no kisses in the rain, no going back. An end that respects the pain they caused and the pain they experienced. Because some stories, to make sense, need to end even when there is still memory. And so, the story ends. With dignity. With lucidity. With a weight that will not be forgotten anytime soon. Now I want to know, what did you think of this story? Comment below, your opinion is very important. And if you like real, raw, intense stories like this, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications so you don't miss any episode. Always remember, this channel does not support, does not romanticize and will never justify any type of betrayal. What we do here is show, without filters, what really happens when the truth comes to light. Until the next story.